One of the most iconic and famous events to take place in British history was when on the 5th of November 1605, authorities in London discovered copious amounts of gunpowder stored under the Houses of Parliament. The Gunpowder Plot was devised to blow up the Houses of Parliament and King James I and his government and royal family. But the plot was hours from going ahead, but along with the gunpowder, the King's men seized one of the key plotters, Guy Fawkes. He had been caught literally red-handed, sitting on the gunpowder, and he was found with a slow match and over 30 barrels of the explosives. But following his arrest, Guy Fawkes was then brought in front of the King, who sanctioned his torture to find out who else was behind the plot, and what was uncovered was a huge scheme that would have changed the British monarchy and history forever. But Guy Fawkes would be subjected to a brutal torture ordeal, and also an execution in which he had the final say in his demise over the executioner who was there to take his life. Join us today to look at the horrific torture and execution of Guy Fawkes, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. King James I had been ruling over England for a few years, and the Gunpowder Plot was made to kill him and his government. A group of Catholic conspirators wanted James's 9-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, to be crowned as a Catholic Queen of England. They wanted to kill James and other Protestant figures inside the royal family and government, along with members of the Privy Council and MPs inside the House of Commons. The government would have fallen, as would have the monarchy, should the Gunpowder Plot have been successfully carried out, and there would have been a huge explosion which would have blown up half of London. Guy Fawkes was raised as a Catholic, and he had a varied military career in Europe. He was a man who joined Sir William Stanley, another Catholic, and he joined the fight with Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester's expedition to the Netherlands during Elizabeth I's reign. He was a junior officer and was seen as a reliable soldier, and Fawkes then went to Spain to raise support for a Catholic rebellion in England. He went under the Italian variation of his name Guido at times, and he believed Elizabeth I's successor James I was a heretic and not the rightful king. But in 1604, Fawkes got involved in the conspiracy of the Gunpowder Plot, which was led by Robert Catesby, and the men that gathered wanted to kill the king. Fawkes was a pleasant man of approach and of cheerful manner, opposed to quarrel and strife and loyal to his friends, and he was a military leader who was one of the head people within the plot. He was a tall and powerfully built man with thick reddish-brown hair, a flowing moustache and a bushy brown beard, and was a man of action capable of intelligent argument, as well as physical endurance somewhat to the surprise of his enemies. The conspirators gathered for the first time on the 20th of May 1604 at the Duke and Drake Inn on the Strand in London. Catesby led the talk and they began to plot to blow up the king. Fawkes and others such as Sir Thomas Percy managed to gain access to a house in London, and Fawkes would act as a caretaker of the house under the alias John Johnson. The conspirators from this house then dug a tunnel to Parliament to place the gunpowder, but noises above them made them change their plans. The noise came from the undercroft directly below the House of Lords that was being cleared, and then the plotters hired out this specific room, and they began to store the barrels of gunpowder. 36 barrels were stored there, but the plague was causing chaos in London, so the state opening of Parliament was pushed back to the 5th of November. But Guy Fawkes would be the one who would be trusted with lighting the fuse to blow up Parliament, and he was then to cross the River Thames to escape to safety in the Midlands, where a rebellion would occur to capture Princess Elizabeth. But one of the conspirators would commit the fateful act of warning Lord Monteagle via letter not to attend the state opening of Parliament, and this was then passed to the King's men, which brought the plot to its knees. James I would order a search of the cellars hours before the state opening, and with this they found the gunpowder and Guy Fawkes, who had on his person a watch, a slow match, and his riding gear ready to leave. He was then taken to the king for interrogation. When he entered the Privy Council, he said he wanted to blow you Scottish beggars back to your native mountains, and he was regretful that the plan did not go ahead. But to extract more information about the plot from him, James I, in his own writing, authorised the use of torture on Guy Fawkes. He first requested that the gentler tortures should be applied, using devices such as the manacles, before the torture would be ramped up and made significantly worse. It was Sir William Wadd, the Lieutenant of the Tower of London's job to do the torture, and he was ordered by the King to get answers to a number of questions. Fawkes was then imprisoned at the Tower of London, and and was held in what is now known as the Guy Fawkes room. A note on his person was found addressed to Fawkes, but he would not name any other conspirators without torture being applied. On the evening of the 6th of November, Guy Fawkes admitted to wanting to blow up Parliament in the name of the Catholic faith, and he was told to rest up as his torture was about to get much worse. He was tortured terribly until he gave over the names of the other plotters, and to begin with he was placed in the manacles and suspended in the air by his arms, and he was also beaten by guards for hours on end, but he would not say anything. The next day he gave over his real name and identity, and he told guards that there were 5 main plotters from the start, but he was then placed on the rack. This was a stretching device which would tear the limbs from their sockets, and bones would snap and ligaments would rip on the torture device. With each turn of the rack, more pressure was placed on Guy Fawkes' limbs, and he would eventually give over the information which was required because of the rack. He gave more than what was expected, and he signed his confession and was said, "On the 10th this declaration was acknowledged before the Lords Commissioners, and is signed in a tremulous hand, Guido. The signature is supposed to be extorted by the rack, and the prisoner to have fainted before completing it." But Guy Fawkes was broken by his torture, to the point where his signature was not recognisable because of the rack, which left him a mess. It was reported and stated that Fawkes confessed nothing the first racking, but did so when told he must come to it again and again from day to day, till he should have delivered his whole knowledge. Those 8 men who were named and were captured were then brought to trial on the 27th of January 1606. Some had been killed in the shootout in the Midlands, including Catesby and Percy, 2 of the ringleaders. The conspirators, including Fawkes, were taken from the Tower of London to Westminster Hall, and they were then held in the Star Chamber and were on public display, and the King and royal family looked on in secret. The charges were read out and Fawkes stated to have been Guido Fawkes, and he pleaded not guilty. But he was found guilty amongst the other conspirators and was sentenced to death. Each of the men were to be hanged, drawn and quartered. They were to be put to death halfway between heaven and earth, as unworthy as both, their genitals cut off and burned in front of their eyes, and they then their bowels and heart removed, before being decapitated and then quartered, being cut into 4 pieces. The executions of the Gunpowder Plotters occurred in 2 waves, with the first taking place on the 30th of January 1606. But Fawkes was executed the next day with Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood and Robert Keyes. All of them were taken from the Tower of London on hurdles, and they were dragged through the streets of London behind horses. The crowds filled the streets and threw objects and hurled abuse at them, before they got to Old Palace Yard at Westminster, where the scaffold was made. Fawkes was to be executed in front of the very building that he was intending to blow up. But Fawkes would not comply with the executioners, and he wanted to die by his own hand. Following watching the other men being hanged, drawn and quartered, Fawkes was the last to be brought to the scaffold. He was led up the stairs, and he asked for the forgiveness of the King and of England, and he said he'd die a Catholic. But as he was broken from his torture, he was weak, and Fawkes, hobbling up the scaffold, was then led towards a ladder, where the noose would be tied around his neck for the first part of his execution. But quickly he jumped to his death, from the ladder down below, and he crashed from the scaffold to the ground, and he broke his neck, instantly killing him. He avoided the pain of being hanged, drawn and quartered, but this was still performed on his dead body. His lifeless body was hacked to pieces, and his remains were distributed over England to act as a warning to others. But Guy Fawkes was the most iconic of the Gunpowder Plotters, and he and his plot are commemorated each year in Britain on the 5th of November. But should the plan have been carried out, he would have blown up most of London, the King and the royal family, and most of the government. Many people claim that the last person to enter Parliament with honest intentions was Guy Fawkes, but his torture ordeal, as well as his execution, was brutal. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.